Hello, knitting friends, and welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm doing a bit of a deep dive into how to read your knitting. So, this is a skill that perhaps is geared more toward beginners, but it can also be a helpful reminder to anyone who knits, even if you've been knitting for a while. So, what we mean by reading your knitting is to be able to look at your swatch, look at your project, see what you've done, where you've done it, so that you can identify when you need to do it again. For example, increasing and decreasing. Now, I am not going to be able to review every single possible thing you could read from your knitting. So we're going to start with some basics. If you have additional questions about how to read your knitting, be sure to leave a comment. So this is the Humble Light Bulb Stitch Marker. These are super useful in marking things that you have done in your knitting. However, they can get lost. They can be forgotten. They can sometimes even fall off if you don't attach them quite all the way. And so it's still a really good idea to know how to read your knitting. No hate against the bulb marker. It is super useful, but it's good to have a backup option. So let's start with the basics. This is a swatch in which I have done some increases and decreases and knits and purls. And we're going to talk about how to look at what's here and see what has been done. So the very basic is, especially if you're a new knitter, how can you tell if on the last row you knit or you purled? So this might be helpful for ribbing. It might be helpful for if you're using a textured stitch like seed stitch, moss stitch, double moss stitch. You need to be able to tell what the last thing you did was. So if the last thing you did was a knit stitch, the loop on your needle will be wearing a little scarf. And if the last thing you did was a purl stitch, the loop on your needle will be wearing, what do we want to call that? A turtleneck. So basically, if the last stitch you did was a knit, you will have this little V shape. And if the last stitch you did was a purl, you will have this little bump. So that's on the right side. On the wrong side, it'll be the opposite. On the right side here, I knit, so on the back, what I've got are purl bumps. Except for right here, where on the right side I purled, on the back, I will have that little V scarf wrapped around the back of the stitch. So, on the right side and the wrong side, they will be opposites. So if you want to know what you did on the right side, but you have the wrong side facing you, yeah, you can just look over there and see, but you can also remember it will be the opposite. If you knit on the right side, you'll have your purl bumps on the wrong side. So that's the first part, knits and purls. Now, another big one we want to know is counting rows and counting stitches. So on our right side in our stockinette, every stitch is a V. V, V, V. Every row is also a V. So if you wanted to know how many rows you had worked, you have to count each of these V's all the way down. And I've got some increases and decreases kind of in the way. Let's try to find a column where I don't have any. So let's say right here, this column. I can count the rows by counting each V. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Okay? So each V equals one row. What if you're doing reverse stockinette? Just turn it over and count the V's. It's so much easier than counting the bumps, at least in my personal opinion. So every V is one row. What about the loops on your needle? Do you count them as a row? No. And I'm going to demonstrate that here. So down here, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but down here I have worked a decrease. Okay, that's the decrease right there. And I know that I have worked 4 rows since then. So my yarn is over here. That means the last row I worked was a right side row. And I counted and I've worked 4 rows since that decrease. 1, 2, 3, 4. So the loop on your needle doesn't count as the row that has been worked. So that is the basics of counting rows. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But basically each V, 1 row. All right, now let's talk about increases and decreases. So this is an area where, yes, you might use these stitch markers to mark your increases and decreases. You find, you would do this as you are working. You work a decrease, you put the marker in. That way, if you need to count the number of times you've decreased, you just count the markers. And yes, that is easier. But again, markers can get lost. So let's talk about spotting our increases and decreases. So in this row here, I've worked decreases and increases. And your decrease is going to look like one stitch is eating the stitch next to it. So you can see here, I've got rows, and here, rows, and then right here, this stitch appears to be eating the stitch next to it. And now that row is gone. So here's a V, there's a V, these V's are gone. So that is a decrease, and in this case, this is a right-leaning decrease. You can see it appears to be eating the stitch, the column, to its right. Over here, we have the opposite. We have a left-leaning decrease. And it looks like it's eating the stitch over to its left. So that's our slip, slip, knit. And you can see that column of stitches up has disappeared. We still have a V here, we have a V here, but these V's right here are gone because that has been decreased out. So that is how we're going to spot our decreases. A column of stitches disappears, that's pretty obvious, but also we can see right where it happens because a stitch is either going to lean to the right or the left and encompass the stitch next to it. How about increases? How can we see if we have increased? Increases are a new column of stitches, so it's pretty easy to kind of see that they're happening. Suddenly we have a new column of stitches, but we need to know exactly where they happened. And that is right here. So you can see I have a column of stitches here. I have this column of stitches here that suddenly veers off to the right. Here is the increase. And you can see it kind of looks like half a stitch. In this case, a right-leaning increase. We see the right leg of our V pretty prominently, but not really the left one. He's hiding in there. So that's where our increase happens. We suddenly have this one leg of a stitch popping out of the one next to it. This one's leaning over to the right. And then over here, it is leaning to the left. So again, see if I can get a good zoom in here. Right here, we have a new column of stitches suddenly appearing, and we have a left leg of a stitch kind of popping out of the one next to it. The right leg of the stitch is more hidden. He's down in there. But this left leg is pretty prominent. So that is where we have increased with a left leaning increase. And yes, suddenly there's this new column of V stitches going up. So let's revisit the issue of counting rows, because what if we need to count the rows between our increases and decreases? We're going to do the same thing. We don't count the increase or the decrease. We count what's in between. So again, here is our decrease. And then here is another decrease. And we want to count how many rows we have worked in between them. So we're not counting here where the decrease happened. We're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then here is the next decrease. We don't count that decrease either, so there are 7 in between. And the same is true of increases. So here's one increase, here's another increase. Let's count between. We don't count the increase itself. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and there's the new one. So 7 in between. We count those V's, but we don't count the increase itself. And that's how we can figure out how many rows we've worked in between our increases and decreases. Again, great to mark it with a stitch marker, but if you don't have one or you're worried about them falling off, whatever, you still want to be able to know how to go ahead and count them. Okay, and the last topic I want to touch on a bit today is cables. So cables can be crisscross and all over the place, very intricate, and that is a more in-depth subject, but we can talk a little bit about basic cables. And so looking at these, let's discuss the direction of the cables. So you'll sometimes see right cross, left cross. There are another style of abbreviations that are used that used to be used more often for cables, but mostly what you're going to see are like 2/2LC, 2/2 left cross, or 2/2 RC, 2/2 right cross. So let's talk a little bit about that. So in this case, these are 2/2 cables, so that means 2 stitches crossing over 2 stitches. And you can count the stitches here, 1, 2, 3, 4. And when we say left, we mean that the stitches in front are moving to the left. The stitches in back, obviously, then are moving to the right. But when we see that abbreviation, or we want to know, what kind of cross has been worked, we're going to look at what's in front and the direction it's crossing. And the same over here. So these are also 2/2. You can count 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the stitches in the cable itself. And then here you can see that the stitches that are in front are crossing over to the right. Now, the really tricky part for cables is counting the rows in between your cable crosses. So as you can see, they get a little mixed up here, and it can be very difficult to count the rows in between. So I am working these cable crosses every 6 rows, which means there should be 5 rows in between. As I said, that can be a little tricky to count, especially what's already on the needle. So your best bet is to make sure you're counting those rows in between rather than going backward and looking at cables that have already been crossed. However, it's not impossible. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then this is the row where they cross. Let's see about this one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then this is the row where they cross. However, admittedly, that is a little more difficult to go back to previous crosses and see how many stitches are in between. It's a little bit easier to count what's on the needle. So what I'm going to do, I finished the last right side row is where I did this most recent cross. I am going to work exactly 5 plain rows, and then I'm going to show you counting up from the last cross. Okay, so as I said, it's a lot easier rather than going, working your cable row and then saying, oh wait, did I work the correct number of rows in between? It is much easier to pause before working your cable row and count to make sure you've worked the correct number of rows in between. So if you are working your cable cross every 6th row, that means you should have 5 rows since the last cross. So we're going to come in here to our cable, And remember, we're counting these. So it can be tempting to kind of like peel these apart, but no, that's the actual cable cross row. We don't need to count that. We need to count what has been done since. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have worked the 5 rows in between. We don't count this loop, and it's tempting to want to count this little guy here, but he is actually in the row where we did the cross, so we don't want to count him. We're going to count the first fully visible stitch after that cable cross. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have worked the correct number of rows. It is the same for a right side cable cross. So again, we did want to avoid the temptation to kind of peel that cable apart to look at that. That's part of the cable cross. We're not counting that. We're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows since the cable cross row. All right, so that is sort of the overview of general things you might be looking for when you're trying to read your knitting. Knit and purl stitches, counting rows, identifying increases and decreases, and a little bit about counting rows with cable crosses. As I said in the beginning, this can't possibly encompass absolutely everything you might be able to read from your knitting. So if you have additional questions about how to read your knitting, please do leave a comment. I will do my best to either answer in the comments, or I may save some questions that are a bit more in-depth for a part 2 video to come up later on this year. Thank you so much for joining me for this video. If you found it useful or educational, I hope that you will give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. New knitting videos here every Saturday. If you're looking for me on social media, you can find me on Ravelry and Instagram as Media Peruana, and I will see you soon in another video.